morning. So, session 2 of this study is on cost classification, codification, and behavioral aspects. Cost classification, behavior codification, and behavioral aspect. But let's take a recap of what we did in session 1. In session 1, we define cost. We define cost as the process of ascertaining the cost of activities, economic activities that is being carried out that requires separate measurement of cost, that the process of determining that cost, using or applying accounting principles, methods, and techniques as, illustrated in CIMA definition, is what we all know, or we know as cost accounting. That cost accounting is the application of accounting principles, accounting methods, and accounting techniques in the determination or in the measurement of cost and the analysis of that cost in comparing it with the actual performance to enable you to do your various analysis. So that is cost classification. We also look at things like the cost unit, the cost objects, and we saw that a cost object is any activity, whether it is a product or a service, that require a separate, cost measurement. So that is cost, object. And we also say that in some cases a cost unit is the same thing as a cost object, but in some other cases a cost unit may be different from a cost object. So we also look at the relationship between cost accounting and financial accounting, and we find out that there is a common denominator, between the two concepts, and that is the application of accounting principles, accounting techniques, and accounting methods. Both concepts use that in achieving their objectives. So we also look at the weaknesses of financial accounting, where we saw that in financial accounting, when you look at the financial report, you will see that it does not classify, it doesn't classify the figures, into maybe jobs, into products, into as services. That's the cost. It doesn't classify this cost. It doesn't break down this cost, into those different classifications. What you see is, total figures that have already been spent. We also found out that the costs we are seeing in financial accounting are historical costs. They are not, present value costs or current costs. No, they are all historical costs. So these are some of the things we identified as the weaknesses. So now we are going to look at session 2, and session 2, like I said, dwells on cost accounting, codification, and behavioral aspect. And the key thing that we're expected to learn here, that's our learning outcome for session 2, is that we should be able to, at the end of this session, define classification of costs. Have it at the back of your mind that when you finish studying session 2, you should be able to define cost classification. You should be able to explain the various patterns of cost behavior, and also you should be able to define the term of, you should be able to define, cost codification. You should be able to know and explain what cost codification is all about. All right. So now, what is cost classification? Well, let's look at it. Cost classification. Cost classification is concerned with controlling operations, products, or services. Cost accounting classification. Sorry, let me repeat myself, please. I said cost control, Cost control has to do with that process of controlling operations, controlling the cost of operations, controlling the cost of products, and the cost of services. All right. So if we look at it from the point of CIMA defined cost classification as the arrangement of costs into logical groups with respect to their nature, their function, or use in the business of the entity. Cost classification is the arrangement of costs into a logical sequence, into logical groups or logical sequence, which include classification according to nature, classification according to function, classification according to the use in the business. When we look at classification of according to nature, we look at it in that respect. Cost is classified into fixed, variable, and value added. When we look at it from the function classification, cost is classified into production, selling, administration, and what have you. All right. So there are different classifications of cost, according to CIMA, that I have just broken down for you. And that, like I said, includes classification according to nature, classification according to function, and classification according to use in the business. Now, cost can be classified variously. Cost can be classified variously. 1. Cost can be classified in accordance with elements of cost. 2. Cost can be classified according to nature. I've said that before. 3. Cost can be classified according to function. 4. Cost can be classified according to cost behavior. So it is important we get these key classifications. Very, very important. Very, very important that we get these cost classifications. Very, very important. Now, let's look at cost classification according to elements of cost. Cost classification according to elements of. When cost is classified according to elements of cost, what we are saying here is that cost is classified according to whether it is material cost, labor cost, or expenses. These are the elements of cost that we identified in our session 1. We identified these 3 elements in our session 1. And we are saying here in session 2 under cost classification that cost can equally be classified according to elements of cost, which include material, labor, and expenses. All right. So now when we say material, like I said, we said earlier that materials are usually those components, those materials, physical materials, components and things like that are used in the production of products or services. So material costs are input. They are input costs, in the production of goods and services. So, and I said here that it could be your raw material, it could be, I am just giving examples of what material cost, entails or it consists of. It could be raw materials, it could be components, it could be consumable goods, consumable tools that are used in factories. It could be work in progress. Work in progress, is an item that has been produced up to a particular stage, but is now used as an input in another process. So, and things like that. So there are many examples of material costs, including stationery and things like that. So labor, another element of cost is labor. Labor is the wages or salaries that you pay employees. All right, so this is very direct and very, very identifiable. Those wages, salaries, or whatever you call it, stipends that you pay employees for their services, that's labor. Expenses are all other costs that you incur that may not be classified under labor or material costs. Any other cost that is necessary in the production of that goods or services that does not include material, labor, such other costs are regarded as expenses, and this may include utilities like electricity and water, your rent, your what do you call it, royalty payments, hire of equipments and things like that. A lot of things that could cause fall under that. Now let's look at classification according to nature. We have just dealt with classification according to element of cost. Let's look at classification according to nature. Classification according to nature is looking at whether that cost is direct or indirect. Get it, please. Whether that cost is directly identifiable or indirectly or indirect. That is classification according to nature. These are direct costs, are those costs that are directly identifiable to the production of that goods or to the production or to a cost unit. Any cost that is directly identifiable to a cost unit is a direct cost. Please get it right. Any cost that is directly identifiable and chargeable to a unit cost is a direct cost. Direct costs are not apportionable. Please, let's get this straight. This is a distinguishing factor. Direct costs are directly identifiable. They are not apportionable. They are not attributable. They are directly identifiable and chargeable to a cost unit. Now, examples of direct costs include direct material, direct labor, and direct expenses. And it's important that we get these distinguishing factors very, very clear. So with that, we can look at classification according to function. Classification according to function. All indirect costs, that is your overhead, are regarded as are classified according to function. I repeat, all indirect costs, that is all your overhead costs, are classified according to function. And when we say according to function, what we're saying here is it could be production overhead, it could be selling overhead, it could be marketing overhead, it could be distribution overhead. And the point here is that all these costs of overhead are apportioned to the cost unit. They are apportioned to the cost unit, and that's what makes them to be indirect expenses, or rather indirect costs, because they are apportioned to the cost unit or to the product that is being produced. All right. So with that, we now look at cost classification according to behavior. Cost classification according to behavior. When cost is classified according to behavior, now cost is seen to either be a fixed cost, a variable cost, semi-fixed cost or semi-variable cost, step fixed cost, all right, fixed cost, I repeat, variable cost, semi-fixed cost or semi-variable cost, as the case may be, step fixed cost. So these are the various classifications according to cost behavior. These are the various classifications according to cost behavior. All right. So we, like I said, cost classification according to function. All indirect costs, like I said, all indirect costs, overheads are all classified according to function, and we have identified some classifications to include production overhead, selling overhead, marketing overhead, distribution overhead, administrative overhead, and all that. All right. So you can actually look up to some of these things in details from your course materials because of the issue of time on our side. Now, production overhead, these are indirect costs of manufacturing, a cost unit. Production overheads are indirect costs of manufacturing, a cost unit. It comprises of indirect materials that are consumed in the factory, indirect factory wages, and other indirect expenses connected with that production. All right. Remember, we are dealing with classification according to function, which we broke down into production overhead, and we're just trying to explain production overhead, which, like I said, production overhead are indirect costs that are incurred in manufacturing a cost unit. And I say that this may include indirect materials, indirect factory wages, indirect expenses. Selling overheads, these are selling costs like sales promotion costs that is incurred in selling. Marketing overheads, which is almost the same thing as selling overhead. This includes your adverts, your publicizing, presenting to customers, those expenses that you incur in making the product or service attractive, to customers, could be regarded as marketing overhead. Distribution overhead are those expenses that you incur in making the goods available to the customers, making them available to the market, making them available to various destinations of the market. Administrative overhead is those overheads that are being incurred in the administration office, which may include those who are responsible for setting policies in the office, research and development, and all that. Those administrative expenses are regarded as administrative overhead. So with that, we have dealt with those cost classification. Remember, we have dealt with cost classification according to element of cost, according to nature, according to function, and according to cost behavior. All right, so that is very important that we remember them. Now let's look at cost classification according to behavior. Cost classification according to behavior. Like I said, when you classify cost according to behavior, you are breaking costs into either fixed cost, either variable cost, either semi-fixed, either semi-variable, or step-fixed cost. So these are the various breakdown of cost behavior. Now let's just look at some of them, a few of them that we can explain. Let's look at fixed costs. These are costs that do not vary with changes in level of activity. A fixed cost does not vary with with changes in level of activity. Now that level of activity is set. When the level of activity is set, fixed costs remain fixed to the extent that that level of activity has not exceeded. So changes within that level of activity, fixed costs do not change, with those changes within the level of a defined level of activity. So that is fixed cost. Variable costs on the other side are costs that vary in direct proportion with changes in level of activity. So we are seeing variable costs as opposite of fixed costs, while the fixed costs do not vary in line with changes in level of activity. Variable costs do vary. They do vary in line with changes in level of activity. And a very good example of variable cost is your raw material, cost of your raw material, cost of your direct wages, and cost of your direct expenses. These are variable because they change along with the changes in level of activity. Now let's look at mixed cost. Mixed cost. Mixed in the sense that it could be semi-fixed, it could be semi-variable. Now these costs, they have element of fixed and they have element of variable in them. That is, for a given range of level, the cost may remain constant within a certain level, and beyond that level it changes. Cost may vary in direct proportion with changes in that level of activity. For example, cost of utility such as electricity, water, and telephone. These costs, they have some, they are mixed in nature because, to a certain level of activity, they remain fixed, but beyond that, they change. So that is that. Now let's look at cost classification according to product cost and period cost. This is another important classification. Cost classification according to period cost or product cost. Now, product costs are costs that are identified with goods produced or purchased for resale. I repeat, product costs are costs identified with goods that have been produced or goods that have been purchased for resale. For example, if you produce bread, a product cost is a cost that can be identified with the production of that bread. All right. Now, if you buy a handset, for sale, now product cost is a cost that is identified with that purchase that you have made for that purchase of handset which you intend to resell. So either it is for production or either it is for purchase. Product costs are identifiable. They identify with the goods produced, and they also identify with the purchase that are made. So they are usually production costs and manufacturing costs in nature. So the second classification is classification according to expired product costs. These are portion of production costs which relate to products that have already realized revenues and do not have future revenue generating potential. In fact, their potential for revenue is already exhausted. So they do not have potentials to generate future revenue. So such costs are regarded as expired product costs. All right. Period costs are costs incurred or charged against a profit for a period. If you say a period cost from January to December, if that is a defined period for reporting, costs incurred within this period of time is regarded as period costs. So examples that we could see include, costs relating to selling and distribution overhead. Costs can also be classified according to controllable and uncontrollable. Costs can also be classified according to relevant and irrelevant costs. So these are other classifications. Recall that the main classifications we dealt with are classifications according to element of cost, according to nature, according to function, and according to cost behavior. All the other ones that we have been talking about now relating to product and period costs, relating to controllable and uncontrollable, are other classifications. We have classifications according to relevant and irrelevant costs, so that's that about classification of cost. So now the next thing we need to look at, very important in this session, is codification. Cost codification. This is an important element, or an important knowledge in cost accounting that is very, very relevant to us. Now, cost coding system. What is cost classification in the first place? What is cost codification in the first place? The terminology defines code as a brief, accurate reference designed to assist classification of items by facilitating entry, collation, and analysis. All right? Cost classification of controlling costs is not complete until codes are applied to classified cost items. Let's get it, please. What we are saying here is that mere cost classification, that is classification according to element of cost or nature or what have you, is not meaningful until codes are assigned to cost items for reference purpose, to ease reference, to ease identification. All right. So that term code, like I said, is a brief. It's a brief and accurate reference that is designed to assist the classification of items by facilitating entry, collation, and analysis. In other words, codification facilitates or enhances, collation of cost and analysis of cost. All right. So now let's look at methods of codification. There are three popular methods of codifying classified items, and these are the mnemonic method, the decimal method, the mnemonic method. Secondly, the decimal method. Okay. So basically there are two. There are two methods of cost codification. Identified, one as mnemonic method, second one as the decimal method. Now, mnemonic methods apply symbols. They involve the use of symbols in classifying cost items, and these symbols would involve putting letters together. In some cases, letters and figures are combined together to form a mnemonics. A mnemonics that is easy to remember. For example, if I say FAU, it could mean factory unit. If I say ADM, that will mean administration. If I say DMA, that will mean direct. So these mnemonics, they facilitate collection of cost items and entry into the books and analysis of this cost. The second method is decimal method. The decimal method uses whole number. They use whole number to this method applies whole number to a master group and decimal. It applies a whole number to a master group and decimal to primary and secondary groups in each of the master group. All right. What are we saying? That the decimal method applies whole number to a master group and also a decimal to a primary and secondary group within the master group. So that is master groups we mean here is the example is the direct material, direct labor, direct expenses, and all that. So with this, we have come to the end of session 2. We have come to the end of session 2, and by way of recap, it is important that we understand that what we have learned in session 2 is on cost classification and cost codification. Cost classification, a moment please. Cost classification, cost codification, and behavioral assets. So that is basically what we have learned in session 2. We have learned what cost classification is as defined by CIMA. We have also learned different methods of classification according to element of cost, according to nature, according to function, and according to behaviors. We have learned what each of them means. Classification according to elements, we have learned about direct method, direct material, direct labor, direct expenses. Classification according to function, we've learned about production, marketing, and all that. According to behavior, we learned cost can be classified according to fixed, according to variable, according to semi-fixed, according to semi-variable. So with that, we have come to the end of session 2, and I want to thank you for listening.